A new study by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, indicates that 45% of available food supply in this country is wasted. This is occurring while there's increasing food insecurity. According to the study, an estimated 10.3 million tons a year of edible food does not reach people. CSIR Principal Researcher Dr. Suzan Oelofse joining us now on the Media View to tell us more about what this study has found and what are the implications of this. Dr. Oelofse, good afternoon. Welcome to the Media View. Your research basically points to a very inefficient food value chain in our country. First up, just to get a sense of how bad the situation is, how much food waste do we have?
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, the situation is quite bad if you look at the numbers, but before I go into that, I just want to clarify that the food waste that we've calculated is from a food security perspective, and therefore it looked at the food that is aimed for human consumption that does not reach the human stomach, and therefore food waste that's diverted to other uses such as animal feed is also included in this number. So this means that the 10.3 million tons does not all end up on landfill. Some of it is diverted to other users, so it's not totally lost to the economy. So but it is still...
Yeah, sorry, just the 10.3 million tons I referred to in my intro is not all edible food meant for human consumption. Not all of it was meant for human consumption.
It was initially meant for human consumption, but some of it was since diverted to other users, such as animal feed.
Okay, fine. So how bad is the situation?
Okay, so the situation in my mind actually points to quite a number of inefficiencies in our supply chain, and the inefficiencies relate specifically to, sorry about that. The inefficiencies relate specifically to planning and stock control at all stages of the supply chain. And if we start looking at on farm level, there you find that especially the small-scale farmers don't necessarily plan very well on what type of commodities they produce, and that results in oversupply at markets, and in the oversupply result in wastage. So that is on the one hand. Then also, if you look throughout the supply chain, the majority of the wastage is happening at processing and packaging stage of the supply chain. And here it is mostly around consumer preference that drive what actually gets processed and what ends up in the package. So food with blemishes, and that's not perfect, will typically be sorted out at that level of the supply chain already, so that we only see the food that is likely to be bought by the consumer entering into the packaging and making it to the retail stage of the supply chain. So there again, during the processing stage, planning is quite important because also when there's shutdowns or interruptions in electricity and the system comes to a halt, then everything that was in that system is potentially wasted as a result of the way the processing happens.
Dr. Oelofse, when did you do this study? In what period does it cover? I heard you just mentioning load shedding there. That would have an impact, of course, on the manufacturing sector, and food processing sector.
Well, for the purpose of this study, we looked at the production from 2014 till 2018, and that is just to give us 5 years, because there are variation year on year in what is produced and available in South Africa, and we use then the average production per year as our baseline to determine the average per year wastage.
Okay. Were there particular commodities that stood out in, as you saw, this inefficient food value chain? You've mentioned the various stages, including packaging, where then, and also issues of making choices by consumers. Can you give us an idea of were the particular commodities, food products, that were worst affected? I mean, like your cereals, for example.
Absolutely. You mentioned the cereals. They are top of the list. About 50% of all the food wasted is cereals. And that ties to cereals being the staple foods in South Africa. And there specifically, we look at pop, rice, bread are the most wasted at consumption level. And obviously, because it's a milling process to prepare cereals, there is quite significant wastage or losses in that process. Following on that, you find the fruit and vegetables. That is typically the more vulnerable food that requires a cold chain to be maintained and is also easily bruised and subject to wilting. So therefore, that is where a lot of wastage happens. And the third in the list is actually milk. And milk speaks to also the related dairy products that's produced from milk. And again, it is products with a short shelf life, and that's very dependent on maintaining a good cold chain to ensure that it reaches or that it is suitable for human consumption within the period that it is available. So yes, that is the three most important ones. We also see some wastage in other fields, but lower levels.
Okay, finally, and if you may, Dr. Oelofse, I mean, when you do such studies, you make findings, and then maybe you look at the implications and you might make recommendations. I haven't read the whole study, but what does this mean then for us? I mean, what are the implications here? What should we do to stop such wastage, or is it possible to stop it? Very briefly, ma'am.
Okay, the reason we did this study is to get a baseline of how much is wasted in South Africa, because South Africa signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to reduce food wastage by 50% by 2030. So therefore, we need to be able to track our wastages. And if you look at what we can do, as I said previously, better planning throughout the supply chain, even at household level, will make a big difference. And that comes down to checking what you have in your household before you go shopping. When you come home and you put your food that you purchased in your cupboards, put the new stuff at the back so that the old stuff can be used first before it goes off, because that will reduce wastage significantly. And similarly, a lot of the retailers cater for consumers walking into the shop wanting to have everything available, and therefore there's more stuff available in the shop than what will be purchased. But that is to accommodate the consumer. And if we as consumers are more accommodating, then it means that even at that stage in the supply chain, we can think a bit differently about how stock is maintained in some of the retailers. But people often want to go into one shop, get everything they need before they leave, because not everybody in South Africa also has the means of transport to go to a different shop if they can't find what they need. But I think a big driver to reduce food wastage will be to buy locally, support our local farmers. If we can reduce the food chain to a shorter chain, it means that more food will be consumed in time before it goes off. Also, if we eat in season, that will help, because buying food that's out of season means that it spends a lot of time in storage, cold storage specifically, that require a lot of electricity to maintain the correct temperature. And also it results in possible damages during storage that you won't have if you buy what is in season. So those are just some of the things that we can think about. And always just,
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor. I'm sure there's more that can be done, but just a few examples of what we can do as well as consumers to improve or stop the wastage of food. That's the CSIR Principal Researcher, Dr. Suzan Oelofse.